Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in today. Tia from Order of the Bookish here. I am interviewing author Kami Larsen. She is the author of A Simple Tale of Water and Reaping, and she has a couple other stories as well. So, Kami, thank you so much for joining us today. I would love to hear about your writing, your stories, and your inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be doing this. Yeah, so, I wrote A Simple Tale of Water and Weeping. It's been out now 2 years. It got published in October of 2021. And I started that. Um, Actually, I've always written just sort of as a hobby, and it still is a hobby. It's not my real job, but I started it when the pandemic kicked off. And that was because in my real life, in my other life, I'm a pediatrician. And so being in the healthcare field at the beginning of the pandemic, it was a scary time. It was, there was a lot of uncertainty. People were nervous. My patients were nervous. I was nervous. My family was nervous. And I needed a way to escape. And so one day at work, I had some time to kill at lunchtime, and I just started thinking about a story that I thought would make me happy. And so I started writing it, and um, a few months later, I had this finished novel, and decided that I would get it professionally edited and try to share it with the world. And so it was. I know a lot of people did crazy things during the pandemic, and that was my crazy thing to do was to write this novel. And then after that, I just sort of decided that my hobby, my passion for it, I wanted to keep going. And so since that time, I've gotten the writing bug, and have taken other stories that I'd started a long time ago, and cleaned them up, and worked on those, and have gotten those put together as well. So that's where the inspiration came from a personal standpoint. The inspiration for the book and the characters was, I've always loved folklore. I love fantasy. I read tons. I read way more than I write. And so I was thinking there wasn't a lot of fantasy books about Selkies and Celtic folklore, which is what Water and Weeping is. It's about Selkies and Celtic folklore, banshees and kelpies, and that kind of stuff. And so I really wanted to take something that I didn't wasn't just the typical fairies or fae or werewolves or vampires, or things that there was a lot of out there. I wanted something that was a little bit different, but I also wanted a book that had a lot of heart, and had a deeper meaning of acceptance and friendship, and accepting people who are maybe different than you, or things like that, and kind of ran with that whole idea.
I love that so much. And we did have your book on our Bookish Boosters ARC team, and your writing, everyone absolutely loves it. You always get such good reviews from our team, and our readers cannot get enough of your work. A Simple Tale of Water and Reaping, everybody loves. And then you also have this new book under a pen name. And it does hang on on a cliffhanger. It's kind of a book slash series of short stories, and it's one of my new absolute all-time favorite reads of like all time. I'm super excited for you to come out with the second half because that cliffhanger really just kills at my soul.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Again, that the cliffhanger wasn't necessarily intentional. I wanted to share the beginning of that story, and I know it's not. I guess it's not fair. It was kind of a selfish thing, because the second half of the story continues with the two main characters, Doria and Miles, obviously. And at the time that I had the first half done, I still needed one more short story to put in the second half. And I was having trouble coming up with an idea for another short story for the second half. And I was like, well, I don't want to wait on this part. So let me find a good spot where it breaks, and then I'll just get that third short story together, to put into the second half. So that book is almost done, and it is set to come out in December. So and it is also a shorter read, and I think part of me was like, there's a lot of really long books out there. I didn't want it to be too long, particularly for people who maybe didn't love it. I wanted them to get something out of it. They could read it quickly, you know, read it in a day or two and then kind of be done. And if they didn't want to read the second half, then they don't waste their money or their, you know, Kindle Unlimited page reads or whatever on the second half that they didn't like. So yeah, I apologize about the cliffhanger.
I think you are like underselling yourself so much because I think anyone who picks up this book immediately like demands to read the second half. And it's not just me, you know, the readers on our team have been all saying the same thing. The only like negative reviews that we've seen is just readers being so frustrated that they don't have the second half in their
Yeah,
hands.
I apologize. I'm
So
sorry.
at some point, I just want you to consider having both halves and making it into one book. And I would love to like have a physical version of it. I love that you incorporate like short retelling stories. For those of you who don't know, I will link the book in the comment here below. But this book is you know, like a wider story, and then within the story the main character is reading short stories, and those short stories are retellings of some of like your absolute favorites. Like there's a Beauty and the Beast, there's a Red Riding Hood, and Hansel and Gretel, and their retellings are so original and innovative and fun. And I love how you're so easily able to go from Doria's voice, because her voice is different than the voice of the short stories. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you're able to jump from like the short story voice to the voice of your main character?
Yeah, so that I think is because I actually wrote the short stories separately. So I wrote, you know, wrote those actually as a writing exercise, or I started those as a writing exercise to see if I could do short stories um, because I've always just sort of sat down and then ended up with these, you know, these longer stories. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to try this. And I also wanted to do a little more adult. It's not super smutty, spicy, over the top romance, but it does it is got you know a little bit of a romance flair, and that's not something that I have really done in my previous books before. So I started with the short stories first, and then I wrote all of Doria and Miles separately, and went back and inserted the short stories and kind of got in Doria's head and was like, well, you know, she hates romance and fantasy. What is she going to think when she reads this first part of this story?
Mhm.
And a lot of that is, I don't want to say it's a self reflection because I don't think I was ever quite that over the top anti fantasy or anti romance, but I grew up reading like horror and sci-fi and things like that. And so I was always like, oh, I don't, you know, romance. But in the last like 5, 6, 7 years, I've read a lot more fantasy romance and really, really like it. And I was like, oh, why was I so harsh to think it wasn't, you know? So I kind of took a piece of my old self um, and amplified it quite a bit and made that into Doria's personality at the beginning of the book. And what I hope people see it as a love of, you know, watching that progression happen as opposed to me just beating up on fantasy and romance, because I love fantasy and romance and I don't want it to come across as, oh, she says all these nasty things. You know, it's supposed to be like how somebody can learn to like something that they maybe didn't love at the beginning. And I really I didn't mean it to be offensive to anybody who reads fantasy romance, that kind of thing. I just wanted you know, to show that not everybody comes to it the same way.
Mhm. No, I think that very clearly comes through your writing. You know, I absolutely love fantasy. It's my favorite genre to read. It's what I write in. So seeing this character absolutely hate on the fantasy romance genre and be all about like horror, thriller, suspense, I think it's so fun to like watch her go through her progression of this story wasn't for me, but this story, I liked some aspects of it. And then as she gets deeper into, you know, her relationship with Miles and the books that they're reading together, she starts to learn to like certain aspects of it. And I think that's so fun because you're right. I think everybody, one comes into reading in their own way, but also comes into figuring out what their genre is in different ways. So I love being able to like experience that with Doria. And I'm rooting her on because I want her to love fantasy just as much as I do and just
Yeah,
as much as you do.
exactly. Me too. Me too. I think she will by the end.
I hope so. I really hope so. I'm really looking forward to that second book.
Thank you.
So, one thing I do want to talk about is this book is actually written using a pen name. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your thought process behind switching your name for this new series?
So yeah, it was kind of twofold. One, my previously published books have been definitely more young adult fantasy romance. I have a series of books that are called Medicus Corpus, and that is kind of a gender mashup of fantasy sci-fi. It's got a lot of medicine in it because that's what I know well. It's kind of a dystopian desert trek story, but it could be read by younger readers for sure. And I have a lot of my friends who have daughters who are high school age, or my own daughters and friends and people like that who have enjoyed my books. And I wanted to make a clear distinction when I was writing something that was a little more adult, so that my younger readers didn't pick up the book by accident thinking it was going to be a nice, sweet romance like Ailey and Keelan have in Water and Weeping, where there's nothing more than kissing happening, and then they're reading something that's got a little more action in it. So I wanted that distinction to be clear. And then I think that there's always a little bit of self doubt, a little imposter syndrome that happens. I had breakfast with one of my friends that I actually made through Bookstagram. She came into town 6 months ago. I don't know. It was a while back. And we were talking. I said, "Oh, I don't think I could ever really write romance because I just I just don't see myself doing that." She's like, "Oh no, you could do it." And we had this talk about it. And so then I was like, "Well, I've got these other stories. Maybe I could turn that into something and see if it does hit that." But there's always some concern that it's not going to be well received. And so I wanted to definitely have like a separation between my YA stuff and this new project to see if I could make it a success, or make it not be trash, and still not alienate some of my younger readers by picking it up too.
Yeah, I think you should knock your imposter syndrome away. I think you absolutely dominated the story that you started creating. You absolutely successfully write in the romance genre.
Thank you.
As your number one biggest fan at the moment, just knock that imposter syndrome away because you've done it and it's great.
I appreciate
I
it.
really want you to continue doing more of it because it's like I cannot continue raving so much about this book.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
and I fully understand that, even from a marketing perspective,
Mhm.
using pen names is fairly common, especially when you have platforms like Amazon. They kind of, ding you if you try to write using your own name in multiple genres. So,
Mhm.
Amazon doesn't really like when you mess with their algorithm. They want you to
Mhm.
stick with one thing. So I
Yeah.
think, just from a marketing perspective, having a slightly different genre with a pen name would actually be more beneficial than trying to do a different genre with your same name and trying to, defeat Amazon's algorithm.
I think
So
that's
just
really
from a
wise.
marketing
Thank you.
standpoint for all authors, just helpful tip. If you're thinking about switching it up, consider also using a pen name because it will probably be more beneficial in the long run. And speaking of tips,
Mhm.
Cami, you've been doing this for a little while now, and now you have, multiple genres out, you've
Mhm.
experimented, you have such an amazing writing style. Can you give any like tips or advice to new or upcoming authors who, might be making some mistakes or might want to
Mhm.
avoid making mistakes?
Well, so the first tip that I have is to just write. I think a lot of people have these stories within them, and they say, "Oh, I can't compete with the Colleen Hoovers and these big name people out there." But if you don't ever try, you never know. And so, really, just sitting down and starting is the biggest first step. I think being honest with yourself. Do you need help in certain aspects? I think I can string together a link, a sentence in English, but then I have someone read it and they're like, no, this this is there's these errors, and it's humbling because you're like, wow, you're right, that needs to be corrected. So I think having other people read your work is important, because I think what a lot of people struggle with is they just are so excited to share their story that they just put it out there, and they are like me and thinking, oh, I'm not going to make all these errors, but they're hidden because our own eyes don't see them. So having other people read your work before you put it out is good, because the worst thing to happen is to have something out there and then you get terrible reviews about, oh, the grammar was bad, there were holes here, this, you used the wrong character's name, things like that. That's the stuff that your first readers pick up on. So having someone else read your work before it goes out to the masses, and then you get those terrible reviews, because that's soul crushing. You don't want to see that. And you know, yeah, those 1-star reviews can be tough. So, you know, but that's also good advice, is take everything with a grain of salt. What you write is not going to be for everyone, and you have to write what you love and what you like. And yes, there's the idea of writing to market is important, but if you don't love, or you're not passionate about what other people think is important, then it's never going to be any good either. So you have to write what you love. The one thing that I wish I had done differently from the beginning is I did marketing backwards. I wrote the story and I published it, and I had no Instagram following. I had no, I didn't know how to go about self-publishing something and having people getting it into people's hands. I have always done like publishers arcs, but I never really understood how self-published people could do arcs. So I think learning that ahead of time too that's a mistake that I made. And so I was kind of trying to dig myself out of a hole 6 months later after I published my first book, getting people to read it after the fact instead of building a buzz first and then getting it out there. So I think that is important as well. I think reaching out to folks on, your social media platforms. I have found that a lot of the community out there is so welcoming, and they're so helpful, and there are people that want to read books for free, which is not something that I ever really thought about before. But if you ask, people they'll read it, and then they can help you with with changing things or adjusting things. And then so beta readers, ARC readers, those are all really, really important things that I wish I had known back a few years ago. But yeah, just reaching out to people and asking for them to read your work, I think, is a huge bonus, and people do it. I read arcs all the time for other people on Instagram, and I found some great authors who I love their work, that I never would have known of before, because we're not published through Penguin or Random House or wherever. So you just have to be willing to talk to people and make connections.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all those tips, and absolutely great advice. Definitely, if you want to write and you want to be a writer, the first step is to actually sit down and write the book. Get that practice in. And even if your first book is terrible, at least you're now writing and you're practicing and you're getting your voice out there. So just sitting down and writing, getting your beta readers in. I always say, get your beta readers and then get your editor. Beta readers typically don't really care if there's editing mistakes or like little issues here and there. And if anything, they'll help you save your time on your editor and editing. So beta readers, get those in. Very important to have multiple eyes on your book before you publish it, because they are able to help you find those mistakes that you miss as you're reading your own book. Your eyes kind of like skim over the pages because you already know what's happening.
Yep.
And yeah, getting those reviews in, very, very important to get the reviews in as soon as possible. I always tell authors, probably the best way to do it if you're setting up a marketing plan, write, edit, format your book, have it completely done, set up a pre-order. And as your pre-order is getting set up and launched, then start like really going into a full-scale marketing like launch. And that, in my experience working with authors, is always the best plan. It's safer to do it that way and ends up yielding the best results. So Kami, thank you so much for sharing all of that incredible information about your books. Readers, if you haven't read any of Kami's books, I'm going to put them below because her writing style is absolutely incredible. It's innovative. She brings out pieces and stories that you've never seen before. And if you haven't read anything, you absolutely need to read it immediately. Kami's also had a couple books at our Bookish Boosters ARC team. So hopefully, Kami, you'll have another one with us soon. And if you want to read her book for free and leave a review and help her out, join our Bookish Boosters team. And hopefully we will see another one of your books on our list very soon. Kami, thank you so much for being here. And readers, thank you so much for watching. More interviews to come soon. Thanks, everybody. Happy reading.
Thank you.
Bye.